Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Aniegolo. Now, Donald Trump's second impeachment trial is continuing in Washington after U.S. senators rejected arguments that the process was unconstitutional. The former president's legal team said the hearing should not go ahead because he was no longer in office. But though the majority of senators dismissed the claim, only 6 Republicans signed up with the Democrats to move ahead with the trial. And of those 6 Republicans, one's retiring, another 4 were just re-elected, so they have 6 more years before they have to stand. And the final one, Mitt Romney, who was the Republican standard bearer in 2012, has a fair amount of gravitas to himself. Mr. Trump is accused of inciting insurrection after his supporters stormed Congress last month. Well, to get the perspective of the Republicans, I'm joined now by the Republican strategist, Greg Swenson. Thank you very much indeed, Greg, for joining us. What's your reaction to the fact that 6 Republicans crossed the floor and supported Democrats in voting to move the process forward? Did that surprise you?
No, it really didn't. And Charles, you brought up a good point. 4 of the 5 have just won re-election and don't have to really worry about primaries in the next cycle or two, in 22 or 24. And also, one is retiring. So, and look, 5 of Republicans voted to proceed with the trial. And so the fact that, one more has come on board, that doesn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me if a few more came on board. But I think, as your earlier guest said, there's no chance there's going to be 17 that vote to convict.
Well, that really is the big question, though, isn't it, Greg? No big surprise to you that, given that this was a prior vote on whether or not there would be, in effect, jurisdiction in the Senate to bring to trial a former president, and there were 5 Republicans that crossed the aisle, and now 6. The big question is how many more may actually join and vote for conviction, given the way the wind appears to be blowing and the emotiveness of this trial.
Sure. No, it's a great question. Because they voted to proceed with the trial doesn't necessarily mean they will vote to convict. And I would be surprised, if the other 44 or 45 senators that voted not to proceed at all, and this was a few weeks ago, it would just really surprise me if any of them were swayed. And I think it's a bit of a distraction, arguing about the constitutional validity of proceeding. I think it's almost a technicality, and I'm a little bit concerned that the defense is wasting too much time and energy on that, because it's arguable and there's some gray area there. There's no definite clear conclusion in the Constitution that says you can prosecute a former president. But then again, there's some indications that you can. It's very unclear. As you know, there's only been 2 impeachments prior to this one in history. So it's not very clear. So I'm not sure they should waste a whole lot of time on it. Whereas I think there's more merit to focusing on the facts and focusing on the process.
Yeah, but you have to admit, Greg, that so far, it's been good for those who want to see a conviction. That video that we saw was very compelling, and the former president's lawyers didn't really present much of a defense, did they?
No, it doesn't sound like it. And again, I think they're hung up on the constitutional aspects of trying a former president, not a sitting president. And I'm not sure that that's the right way to do it, but I think there'll be more time here, and I'm not too worried about it. I think this, like the last impeachment, could very well backfire on the Democrats, and to a certain degree, it already has. One worry about President-elect Biden is whether he was strong enough to lead his party and rather than be swayed by the progressive left wing of his party. And by deferring to Congress on this impeachment, I think it reinforces that concern. So I think, like the last impeachment in 2019, that essentially, boomeranged or backfired on the Democrats. Trump's numbers went up during that. His fundraising went up. I'm not sure his numbers will go up here, but I think that the idea behind this which is this hatred of Trump on the Democrats. It's really their only unifying message. It's their only real central theme is hating Trump. I'm not sure that that's going to work in a moment in our history where the new president Biden, has been pitching, unity and sort of getting together and working together both sides of the aisle. This is the last thing that is really contributing to any sort of unity, to say the least.
Well, I mean, I think beyond talking about whether or not the Democrats hate Mr. Trump, I think that the point really is a president that's taken an oath of office and how he behaved subsequently. I mean, you could see from that video, the crowd was angry. He could see it. The crowd was angry, and he had to have known that a lot of balled up frustration was heading towards Capitol Hill. And he did nothing to manage or reduce the situation, but he seemed to provoke it. And that's what this impeachment is all about, isn't it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I agree with what you're saying, Charles, by the way. I mean, completely. And I think he made a lot of mistakes. It was not a great PR moment for President Trump on January 6th. But you're talking about the message and, some of the drama that's coming from the tapes that they played. But that's not what the trial is about. The trial is about, this sloppy and single impeachment article, which is accusing the president of incitement of insurrection. And that's going to be a stretch, especially since he called on the marchers to behave peacefully. And, when that comes up in the defense or in the tape, I think that, that will sway, might not sway public opinion. I mean, remember, the president's not running for office tomorrow. This is just, if you focus on the actual trial, I think because there's very little chance that they can win with that incitement of insurrection accusation. If they'd stuck to something that was more winnable, like trying to circumvent the Constitution or trying to convince the vice president not to perform his ceremonial role, those were things that were obviously mistakes and perhaps could have had a lot more probability of conviction if they proceed. But I think if you look at the facts right now, this might be an opportunity for the president or his defense team to talk about some of the other accusations, like the charge of making false statements about election integrity. Those are things that he could actually use to his advantage. But, right now, I think in terms of the focus on incitement of insurrection, the process was hurried. There was there really was no process when the Congress voted to impeach. That's unprecedented and is really not, in the traditional part of the impeachment process, just rushing through an impeachment like that. So, I think there's a lot of mistakes that the Democrats are making. The mistakes that the Republicans made, or some Republicans made, I should say, was on January 6th, starting with the president, that's for sure. And as Vice President Biden at the time said, or President-elect Biden said, this is a small group that doesn't represent America and surely doesn't represent the Republican Party. So it was just a small group of renegades, basically.
Right, but that small group of renegades, to use your term, are having a dramatic impact on your party, the Republican Party. I mean, it's split right down the middle, and a lot of what happened on that day is causing quite a lot of people to leave the Republican Party, from what I understand.
No, yeah, Charles, I don't think that's the case. I think if anything, it's quite the opposite. I mean, there really is no civil war or split. The Democrats like to say that, and I think the media activists that support the party in the U.S. also like to say that, but it's just not true. And so most Republicans, obviously everybody was disgusted with what happened on January 6th, but I think the party's in a good place in the sense that they had, with the exception of Georgia, I think I've mentioned it on your show before, Charles, with the exception of the debacle in Georgia, which also is on President Trump, it was a great election for Republicans. If you look at, the 31 state houses, the pickups in the Congress, only losing 3 seats in the Senate, 27 out of 27 toss-up races were won by Republicans. So, there's actually a moment of opportunity here. If now that the president is not in the White House, and after January 6th, you'd have to argue that he's no longer going to be the kingpin of the party, and he's no longer going to be a possible candidate in 2024. That's actually good for Republicans. It's good for the new generation of prospective leadership. So in many ways, it's an opportunity. This idea that it split the Republican Party is just not true.
And Greg, what are you hearing about the way Donald Trump is reacting to all of this? Because in the past, I mean, we would have seen him, tweeting stuff on Twitter. We're not able to see that anymore. I mean, from inside sort of the Republican Party, what are you hearing?
Well, I haven't heard much, and it was really just from your earlier guest today. That he was upset or whatever, and that's okay. I mean, the president's one that hires and fires people, whether it's in business or in his own White House. He wasn't afraid to be upset with people. So he's not a diplomat. He doesn't have that gift of diplomacy. Sometimes that was refreshing. And I think we needed that disruption in 2017 and during his first term. But it's sometimes, it's unpleasant, it's unseemly. I haven't heard that, but I don't doubt it at all. But I think we need to see, if it was, as your earlier guest said, a bad first day or the first portion of the defense. Again, I haven't seen any reactions yet. But it wouldn't surprise me if the president was disappointed, and we'll see how they perform in the next few days. I'm not that worried about it. I think, again, I think even Democrats agree that this is a very divisive move on the Democratic Party. Partisan revenge is hard to reconcile with bipartisan restoration, which is what Biden has been preaching, in the campaign and as well as, since the election. So they just can't let go. And I think, again, this could backfire on them.
Well, we'll have to wait and see. We'll have to wait and see whether that in fact backfires. The Democrats would argue to the contrary. But, I mean, is it your sense, Greg, that the onus is on the prosecution to prove their case against Donald Trump, and the defense are simply going to sit back and say that prosecutors haven't completely proved their charge against Mr. Trump?
I think, Charles, I think you're right. I think that's what will happen. And again, this sloppy impeachment article of incitement of insurrection, really hard to prove. There's plenty of law that would suggest that they cannot. I mean, there's actually laws that have been discussed or debated in the past, and it's really hard to show any sort of deliberate incitement, in spite of the fact that he was ginning up the rally. But he'd done that thousands of times at his campaign rallies and his rallies throughout his presidency. So I think they overreached on that. I think, the facts don't support it. If they had gone for something a little bit more modest, perhaps, because I think you do have enough, there are Republicans in both the government as well as in the conservative media, that were very critical and thought he should have resigned, or perhaps there was some impeachable offenses, but incitement of insurrection was not one of them.
Right. And Greg, I think we've got about 20 seconds or so. You touched briefly on the mood inside the Republican Party. Have your chums finally accepted that they've lost the election and that there's no chance of the Republicans coming back for the next 4 years?
Look, the midterms look really good for the Republicans, again, because of the Republican sweep, essentially, on November 3rd, with the exception of the White House and of the 2 Senate seats in Georgia 2 months later. So, other than those, the debacle in Georgia, it was there's a lot of momentum in the party. And I think people are actually looking forward to it. And so far, the White House, in spite of preaching unity, has done everything but unifying in terms of policy and these executive orders. So, look, there's very, very little support, and the Republicans are unified against the Biden policies right now.
Greg, you're an absolute star. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks,
Greg Swenson, the Republican strategist, talking to me there. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our assessment of the second impeachment trial of the former U.S. President Donald Trump. Stay with us.